It's Friday, June 14th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Summer is coming, and with it a new issue of Newfoundland Quarterly. This season's theme, science fiction, which is just a chef's kiss for the summer season. So let's boldly go into this show that hopes you live long and prosper. So I begin the show with the editor's note. There's an editor's note every quarter of the quarterly, and here's this one. Science fiction, technological extrapolations, speculative tales, indigenous futurism. Almost ever since people began telling stories, they've talked about alien creatures, voyages to the moon, even time travel. Science fiction novels and films continue to track pretty close to this genre's origins with myriad and fantabulous takes on the theme. What is that in the sky? Who could live underground? How far can we envision, reach, go, and what means will propel us there? As I said, that was the editor's note. Tell us what it is about science fiction that captures your imagination. What was your entry point into the genre as you're listening to us? So those are the questions for you, folks. If you want to join us today, the numbers to call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. The text line is open, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. No shortage of ways to get in touch. Like I said, tell us what it is about science fiction that captures your imagination, right? Was it Star Trek? It was for me. What was your entry point to the genre? Like I said, Star Trek. Joining me now in studio, we've got Joan Sullivan, managing editor of NQ. How you doing?
Pretty good. That's a nice little introduction there, Adam.
Yeah, I went and found, I was like, I want something that sounds like Star Trek, but I don't know if we can play that and put it up on YouTube afterwards. So we've got a rights-free version, and it was close enough. So we figured, let's go with it. It sounded super spacey.
Yeah.
Before we introduce our other guests, why sci-fi?
It actually grew out of our spring issue. The theme was science, and we had thought then, I wonder if we could put some science fiction in that. And the very first thing that I came across at the Center for Newfoundland Studies refers to the two other extremely talented and wonderful people in the studio. I won't spoil that yet. But it really grew into its own theme really fast. We couldn't just smush the two of them together. So we thought, well, we'll do science, and then we'll do science fiction. Nice theme for the summer, think bright colors, futurism.
Totally.
Optimism.
And I think summertime, like we come into for like film and movies, like it's like the popcorn eye candy season of like blockbusters too, right? And so science fiction fits really well into that type of a thought, I think.
Yes, yeah, it is the season.
All right, so joining us, we've got Janet McNaughton here, author of young and mature adult novels, author of 9 young adult novels, a junior novel, and a picture book. Her work has won 16 awards, provincial, regional, and national, translated into Dutch, Danish, French, German, and Portuguese. Janet has lived in Newfoundland and Labrador since 1979. We also have Robin McGraw, multi-genre writer. Robin's work she's published 25 books and hundreds of articles, reviews, and newspaper columns. Her most recent book is Labrador, A Reader's Guide. You're just in Labrador, right?
I was. I got in this morning.
Oh, right on. How's Labrador doing? Is it still super sunny up there?
It is. It's absolutely gorgeous. It looks like Florida. Everybody's out on the patios.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, we were, the show, we went up to Happy Valley Goose Bay in November, had a great time. It did not look like Florida in November, but it still looked great.
I defend the winter weather in Labrador.
Well, it's a real winter.
It's blue skies and it's no wind.
Yeah, unlike whatever it is like that we get on the Avalon, which is, I don't know, I can't describe it as winter. It's something else.
We're trying to forget it.
Slush season. Yes, let's stop talking about it. Let's talk about science fiction. So what were your entry points into science fiction?
Well, for me, growing up in the Cold War, because I'm old, the science fiction, well, first of all, the public library I would go, and there was always like best science fiction short stories of 1965, 1966. So you could read those and expose me to a lot of writers I wouldn't have known otherwise. And then when I was in high school, we read a book, we studied a science fiction novel in English every year. So that was great.
Cool.
Yeah. When I was 9 years old, Star Trek came on for the very first time, and we watched that. And I thought, this is a great future where, Russians and Americans get along, and women have jobs, even if they do have to wear cute little miniskirt uniforms and lots of makeup and the hair, but they still had, a serious and interesting job. So that was all part of it. But I think for me, really, it was the Cold War and the novels that were written about nuclear holocaust, getting past, one that I read was called The Last Babylon. I don't think it's a very popular novel. I can't even name I'd have to look for the author's name, but it was about a immediate post-nuclear war in the southern United States and two brothers, one of whom doesn't survive. And I grew up thinking of science fiction as a way to think about the unthinkable. So when it was time for me to write my science fiction book, I set it post-climate change, societal collapse. It was the same idea, only because I was working with other writers who were working with scientists, and they said the scientists say they don't know how to talk to the children about climate change because it's just so bleak. So, I tried to do for kids what science fiction writers had done for me when I was a kid.
When you were studying it as a kid, did you get excited about it each time? Because you're talking about a book a year or whatever. Was it something because I just remember in retrospect, I think sometimes with what I read in school, I should have been more excited. I've got good memories of it, even though I think at the time I'd be like, I don't know about this.
Well, you're talking to somebody whose parents had to take away her library card at one point.
Oh, well.
Okay. I got excited about reading cereal boxes, There was nothing I would not read. So,
Put the book down.
The opportunity to read a novel in any context was always really wonderful.
Yeah.
When I got to university, there were years when I did 2 novel courses simultaneously, which meant I had to read 2 novels a week. That was insane.
Like that.
Kids would call me a bookworm, and I took that as a compliment.
Why did they take away your library card?
Because I wasn't interested in my schoolwork. They thought it would motivate me to be interested in anything but reading books. But no, I was just training. I could have said to them, it's fine, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up, but I didn't know that. So that was the only thing I wanted to do when I was a child, was read books. And they didn't appreciate the value of reading for children when I was a kid. So they would say, for God's sake, Janet, put that book down and do something. I was actively discouraged from reading. It didn't work.
Wow. That's awesome. I'm just picturing it, right? It's like, put the books down. You have to get outside.
I was not an easy child.
Really? I see. All right. There's another show we can do on Entry Point into Sci-Fi.
Say that again?
Entry Point into Sci-Fi.
Oh, I think it was probably when I was maybe about 12 years old, and I read Wyndham Lewis's The Chrysalids. And oddly enough, it's about Labrador.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what
right?
I focus on now
Of course.
anyway. And in The Chrysalids, well, I think that when you think about writing sci-fi as opposed to fantasy, you can have magic. Somebody clicks their fingers or their heels or something, and everything changes. But in real sci-fi, there's got to be some basis in scientific fact. So that, for instance, in The Chrysalids, what happened is it's a post-Holocaust community after climate change caused by the nuclear bombs, and there are mutants. And in many cases, they're just, like the cover of the original was a child's foot, but it had in a sand, but it had 6 toes. And so this is a community in which at some point the children start to realize that some of them can actually use telepathy, and that if they don't hide it, they will be pushed into the jungle, sterilized, and so on. And some people say that part of that is the roots of Nazism, that's what he was aiming to talk about.
Wow. Right.
Anyway, I went back and read it again as an adult and had to buy a secondhand copy in the bookstore, paperback. And instead of the footprint, there was this creature with sort of fur all around like a parka and lobster claws and all this, and it's green. And it's quite different, but in the book, it is originally, it's simply children with very minor disfigurements of some sort.
They
or
rewrote
improvements.
the book?
No, they just rewrote the cover.
Oh, the cover. Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. different cover art.
Yeah.
So did it hold up still when you reread it? How was that experience? Because there's some books I read when I was younger, not necessarily sci-fi, but like early 20s that I've wondered like, how's this going to read to me now?
I think it read even better.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. If superficially, you think that there is no strong connection between the social order of this new community and the old community in Labrador, but in fact, they're remarkably similar.
That's you can. John Wyndham really does stand out. I think you can reread a lot of his stuff, like Ray Bradbury, which is another entry point for a lot of people. But that's interesting what you just said about the society. I mean, did he have any connection with Labrador whatsoever? Do you have any idea why he settled in Labrador?
No idea at all, except that he probably had been there by taking air flights. It's same as with Neville Shute. Okay, Neville Shute was a pilot, I believe, and he wrote about Newfoundland and Gander and Labrador, and his takeoff point for No Highway is a plane crash in Labrador, and the scientist who has been able to identify why it happened is on his way there, and he realizes that he's in a plane that is exactly the same brand and as the one that went down, and he sabotages it in order to keep them on the ground.
Wow.
But it's got a great bit of stuff about Gander Airport.
And The Chrysalis is one of the books we studied in high school.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
You're lucky.
Yeah, I know. We were very lucky, yeah.
So was that different? Was that like your school class, or was that everyone?
I grew up in this kind of industrial area north of High Park, and it was Runnymede Collegiate. We just happened to have two English. I almost called them professors. Two English teachers who were very, very eager. Like the first time a new Canadian book came into paperback, bam, it was on our list. We read Fifth Business.
Robertson Davies?
As soon as it came into paperback. And they taught us a science fiction book every year.
Cool.
It was, a very ordinary little high school, but we just had remarkable teachers, actually. The head of the history department was a Soviet apologist who only hired left-wing teachers.
That's fascinating. Joan, what was your entry point?
I would say Ray Bradbury.
So Fahrenheit. So the only one, like for me, it was Fahrenheit 451, right? And I loved that. That was one of the books I read when I was like probably like 20 or 21.
Yeah.
And I still remember parts of it, right?
Martian Chronicles?
Everything that I could by him, for sure. It's interesting, though, when you're talking about entry points, because there are interviews with four authors of science fiction besides Robin and Jana. We'll have Kate, who we'll talk to later, and then Melissa Barbeau. And I had intended to ask everybody the same questions and thought, well, I'll probably make it all one big interview, and share it with everybody and just say, here's what I've done with the material. But everything was so standalone and specific. I just left it alone.
Yep.
It just worked so much better that way. And I just found so much of the very specific comments, like Rob and I loved when you talked about your book, what you had to figure out. That I don't know if you want me to spoil it or not, but
go ahead.
what you had to figure out to make the plot happen, like how to keep it plausible.
I needed a very specific scientific answer, and I used to teach at the University of Alberta, and I'd heard about a woman chemist out there who really knew her business, and I wrote to her and said, what if we want to do this? How does it work? And I had tried doing it on my own on Google and things like that, but no, boy, she came up with just what I needed.
Well, it's just, I mean, to do like that type of research, right, around when you're doing this type of writing, to like strive for some form of accuracy, because it's so often, depending on what you're watching or reading, there can be stuff that you're like, well, that's just not.
Yeah, it has to be plausible.
Yeah. And even sometimes folks write it intending it for it to be plausible, but if you think and like look at it for a bit, you're like, no, it's not, right? Like you'll see it a lot. Like people dive into stuff and they'll dissect it or whatever and be like, actually, we talked to some scientists and this is actually not possible whatsoever. And then I find it can lose something if all of a sudden you don't have a little bit of that, like you said, reality kind of put in for it.
A
Yeah.
lot of people have that problem with three-body problem.
Yeah.
Well, I know, like Stephen King researches his stuff. He's got one story of how a man assassinates a crime figure with a very specific kind of car accident, and he wrote like his brother's an engineer, and he drove him mad. Like what he has in the story, he made sure that he could do it. And he said, I used to live next door to a doctor, and I phone him up and say, could a man actually eat a cat? Like, so there is, and of course his book, The Stand, which is for many people like myself is his my favorite of his, especially post pandemic. You really researched the flu and what a mystery it is. So. That's and so I know when Janet was talking about Rain Tree Rebellion, she was talking about what seemed it was fact based, and yet it seems so impossible, and yet you're already looking back on some of the things that you never expected to see.
The book is 25 years old now. I was published in 2000, and when I had to reread it couple of years, recently, because I was doing a Zoom with a school in Ontario, and it's been a while. The thing that surprised me was how dead on I was about the role that misinformation was going to play in society. I didn't really, I threw that in there because it seemed plausible, but I had no idea, that it was going to do what it has done.
So tell us more about that, like what you were thinking at the time for putting that in.
Well, my main character is a homeless child who really has grown up not knowing anything about what's going on in society, and she was plucked off the streets and sent to a work camp in Grossmoor National Park, which isn't a national park anymore. And she's been told all these things about the way things are, like her work camp is called a model welfare project, for example. And just as she is taken up by these other people, and her view of what's happening in society it changes completely. So misinformation, her entire life, everything she knew about the world around her was based on misinformation that she had been fed, which I thought was plausible. There are a lot of people in authoritarian societies who grow up believing that things, I'm sure there's people in Russia right now who have a completely divorced view of reality,
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that misinformation was going to become such a huge thing in our own society, in our own time. Like, everything is coming up a lot faster than I expected it to. I thought I would get through my entire life without any of this happening, and now it's already started.
So then, question for when the internet kind of came around. So I was like a teenager, right? When we got the internet here, I still remember like going into like my cousin's friend's house, and he was trying to describe the internet because he was doing searching and stuff online. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I remember, or even now, just kind of looking back at interviews and folks who were so excited about like the access to knowledge and information and everything else, that was like the celebration around what this could mean. But now here we are in this time of misinfo, disinfo, horrifying rabbit holes. It is all like, you don't have to go back that long ago where like this is a sci-fi universe, like in a way, which is like, it is disturbing. When did you kind of start to notice that, like, oh wait, the internet, there's some problems?
Well, we got a computer when I was working on my doctorate, and there was no World Wide Web. And then there would be news groups. So it was all very polite, and mostly people at universities. So I watched the whole thing metastasize into what it is now. And I wouldn't have predicted that. Ian Forster wrote this lovely short story, which is science fiction, which is about this world in the future where people mainly communicate through, I can't remember the name of the story, people communicate mainly through internet, which hadn't been invented then at all. And it's all very polite, and they have these, very intellectual hobbies, and it's, what has happened is nothing like that at all. But just very quickly, because I'm taking up a lot of time,
No,
I did a PhD in folklore. And if you look back to the broadside presses in, 1600s, 1700s, exactly the same. All the misinformation, all the gossip, all the
vicious political cartoons.
Vicious. And French Revolution, before the French Revolution, it was all vicious gossip about nobility.
So then do you, like...
It's us.
Not
it's
to
not
keep,
the
yeah,
technology.
this is what I was going to ask. Like, so are we getting better or changing? Because it seems like we're not, and we're staying the same, right? Like, if you talk about that, the fact that, this gets replicated again and again and again.
Well, we are everything, right? If you look at the greater good people who are studying positive psychology, there are a lot of very good people out there trying to do good things.
Yep.
So you don't hear about that much, but we are everything.
Any thoughts?
Well, I think that I tried to convey that sort of thing, but I do it in different ways. Sometimes with poetry, sometimes with stories, sometimes with nonfiction. And it's just one more way. It's one more tool that we can use, the science fiction is. I started to get kind of interested in the whole notion of science fiction, not just as a reader, but as a writer also. When I was teaching in Ontario, I was teaching engineers, and I was teaching them English, and they had to learn to give presentations in meetings, but they also had to learn how to write directions for how to turn on your toaster oven or how to... Well, I mean, I stayed in a hotel in Labrador last night, and I counted the number of buttons on the two little things you use for the television, and there were 49 of them. I had no idea where to start. So I would get my students to do things like, I would say, okay, a man arrives from Mars. How do you tell him how to find the beer store?
Yeah,
or
that's
play
cool.
badminton or whatever. And some of them were terrific at it. And I was hoping they're the ones who go into telling us how to run a sewing machine. And some of them were hopeless. But it made me think that there's ways you can kind of turn things around and say and learn things differently.
Joan, talk to me. There's other things obviously in this issue for science fiction. Like one thing that stood out for me, there's a bit on UFOs.
Yes.
Which, of course.
Yeah, UFO sightings. So it's and not to be making fun of people. There are strange things in the sky, just like
totally.
Just like there was so recently another strange thing in Loch Ness. That was a great story. But so I just tried to pick the most famous ones, and I think the Clarenville sighting from 1978 is still the best known, and partly because one of the witnesses was a police officer, partly because it lasted so long. Partly because it seemed like whatever it was having a lot of fun and replicating rhythms and colors that it could see that was being used to catch its attention, and it was most recently also commemorated in a coin that artist Adam Young designed. Yeah.
My favorite is the exploding hen house on Bell Island.
Tell everyone about the exploding hen house.
I don't remember much about it, but just
the whole
after
Bell Island boom.
Soon after I arrived in Newfoundland, that was 1979. There was maybe it was hit by a meteorite or something, but there was a hen house in Bell Island
poor
that
hens.
exploded. Yes.
Yeah, there was something massively electric happened, and I think the most recent explanation was like a lightning bolt that you actually don't see, but I can't remember what it was. But yeah, I think that was the Bell Island boom. Yeah, from around that time. Yeah, strange things can happen.
Yes, strange stuff happens.
Yeah.
And then the hens didn't see it coming. You are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. It's our seasonal Newfoundland Quarterly show. This season's theme for summer, it's science fiction, right? Which is just such a great theme for the summer, right? Blockbuster movie season. As you're listening to us, if you've got thoughts on what it is about science fiction that has captured your imagination, if you want to talk to us about your entry point into the genre, give us a text, 709-327-8206. The email address is thesignal@cbc.ca, or you can call us, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Let's go to the phones now. We've got Kate Story is on the line, writer and performing artist, originally from Newfoundland, now living and working in Peterborough, Ontario. Kate has published 6 novels, including Governor General's Literary Award finalist and NL Reid's finalist, Urchin. Their first novel, Blasted, won the Sunburst Awards honorable mention. Her short fiction has made the CBC Literary Awards and Relit Awards shortlist. Kate, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So talk to us about science fiction when you were growing up. What was it that kind of spoke to you first?
I think, I just have these early, because of the age I am, watching the reruns of the original Star Trek series, and then, I was 7 when the first Star Wars movie came out, had a huge impact on me, and I think it just spoke to something inside me, because I think like a lot of kids, you sort of feel a bit like an alien, you feel like you don't quite fit in the world, and you're looking for, home. So, in some weird way, I felt like space was like this really cool place to be. And, you know, in a way, like especially the first Star Wars movie, it's really a fairy tale in space.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of appeal for me at that age.
Yeah, I watched it was the reruns of Star Trek growing up, and then I was like 11 or 12 when Next Generation came out on TV, and I was like so excited. I could not. I was like, they've got another one. This is amazing, and it looks even better. So it was great entry points.
That's right. And then also, like, you know, everyone sort of around my age in Newfoundland, growing up with Captain Newfoundland in the Newfoundland Herald. Yeah. So very strange, possibly shouldn't unpack it too closely because something might happen. I think it had a big influence on a lot of us, right?
Oh, the minute you mention it, I can just picture him on the screen, right, with the cape blowing in the wind. Like, you know, it's there. What did it take for you to start writing sci-fi?
It took me a while. Unlike some people who sort of look down on the genre, I mean, yes, you know, obviously there's bad science fiction, just like there's bad anything, you know, in any genre. But a lot of people look down on science fiction for reasons I still can't quite understand. But I knew that to write it well was really difficult, and I wrote a bunch of other things first, not because I didn't want to write science fiction. I just didn't know if I could do it well. And then I had a big revelation reading a lot of older, you know, the sort of stuff published in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And you look at how often they got the science, quote unquote, wrong, of course. And it isn't really the point. You know, the point is that you're making a thought experiment with what you know at the time, but it's really more about the story and the characters, or making comments on present day society, or, you know, issues that matter to you. So once I got that through my head, I tried it. I started writing a little more of it.
You mentioned just how sometimes people can poo-poo on a genre. Like what? Do you feel that they're missing out on or is it just, well, you know, everyone's going to have their own personal taste and that's it?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things going on. One is definitely a kind of snobbery, which I don't have a lot of time for. But the other thing that's going on is I call it reader competency. So there's like a pleasure in knowing how to experience anything in life. Like some people really enjoy shopping, for example. You know, they feel like they know how to do it. Like they have a level of competency, which is part of the pleasure of doing it. And so, you know, with genres, there's like the example I always use is this. I'm not a huge, don't want to offend anyone, I'm not a huge mystery or crime thriller fan. When I read it, I like it for the wrong reasons, quote unquote wrong. So, you know, I'll like it because of the character or you know, something about the setting will appeal to me. But when it gets to the whodunit parts, I get kind of impatient. You know, I don't actually have reader competency or pleasure in those things. So I think for some people reading fantasy or science fiction, they get impatient or feel a little bit at sea, a little bit lost with the cues that those of us who love science fiction and fantasy, like, makes us feel at home and welcome. So I do think that part of your job as a writer, you know, while these genres are market creations originally, I think, but there's also something about not all kinds of storytelling appeal to all kinds of people. And I think you can learn to like a certain genre. But for a lot of us, you know, you might sort of think, oh, no, that's not, I don't feel at home there, you know.
I have a feeling it's something that you have to read when you're a kid, you know.
Maybe, yeah.
I think with the exception of something like Dune, it's not a big, I don't think you get into it as an adult. That's just something I suspect,
that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Science fiction is for people who don't mind being confused. That is the thing. That is the thing that separates people who read science fiction and fantasy to some degree, but really science fiction, because the whole point of a science fiction novel is you are thrown into this strange world, and it's your job to figure out what the hell is going on. You know, and people who don't like that that's why they don't like science fiction. I went to a couple of World Cons, and when I got there, the first thing I noticed was there were all these people who would not fit in anywhere else.
Yes, that's so true.
And they were perfectly at ease and at home and accepted.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
I think that's profound, you know. The cons I've gone to, that's what struck me right away, where you see people, you know, you see a Klingon using a wheelchair. Nobody blinks an eye. It's perfect, right?
Yeah.
You know, gender you can play with however you want. It's a very inclusive community. And, yeah, maybe these are all of us who like those genres don't feel like we fit, and we know this feeling of confusion. I think it's profound.
Yeah, and I hope this isn't a little bit too off topic, but I think everybody that I interviewed mentioned Ursula K. Le Guin.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bless
Yeah.
her.
Go into that a little bit for me.
Oh, just what a fine writer she is. And I really think she was here once.
She was.
She was here once.
Okay,
and
so I'm not-
apparently the talk was not really all that appropriate because she talked about doing something that we were already doing.
But she also met with people outside that
I
were very
thought-
satisfied with it.
Yeah, okay, so I did interview her. I was wondering if I had to rent it. I did interview her, and it was fascinating. And I remember talking with her about the Left Hand of Darkness, especially. But a lot of her stuff, too, I think would be considered YA, maybe even before YA was its own kind of category. But just her world building is something that people mention, and her ability to play with gender a lot too, especially in the Left Hand of Darkness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Her father was an anthropologist, and she grew up reading all these anthropological monographs, which introduced her to the idea that a culture could be vastly different from what you're
I
used to.
didn't know that.
Oh,
That's
that's
so
really
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, she definitely built on that. And yeah, no, she was definitely a trailblazer in so many ways, and refused the idea that it was a lesser genre and that the writing didn't need to be up to a standard, you know?
I'm curious, Kate, I'm just thinking nowadays, like, we come, we go through this pandemic, climate change, Russia's like in the news all the time again for its war in Ukraine. I mean, I still consume sci-fi. Like, I just finished watching Fallout on Prime, which was this fantastic post-apocalyptic, like post-nuclear show. But with everything that's going on, and also we talk about disinformation, misinformation in the world, and those rabbit holes online. What's the role in the future for science fiction when there's so much like just banana stuff that's happening all the time?
I think this.
Well,
sorry.
oh,
Go ahead, Kate.
sorry. Yeah, I thought he was asking me. Sorry,
He
I didn't
was.
mean to
No,
jump in. So I think that first of all, yes, I mean, it's very horrible, everything. I feel personally what's going on, and I feel two impulses in myself. Which one is that I want to read. Sometimes I just want to read things that will just take me somewhere else,
Yeah.
But also, this is not the first time or only time, that the world has gone through this stuff, like a lot of, say, my Indigenous friends, they've lived through genocide. They've lived through horrific experiences. I read a lot about Shakespeare, and like that was a nutty time in England, and he's still writing these fantastical plays, and people love them, but plays that also had topical references that people were getting and really loving at the time, too, on the edge there of sort of political heresy. So I think that we can do both in these genres of fantasy and science fiction. We can take people somewhere else, which is something that people do long for in storytelling, but at the same time, it's the perfect genre for making commentary on the totalitarianism and genocide and so on that's going on in the world.
Anyone else on that?
I was going to say that I think that part of what we do with science fiction is we anticipate the worst. So that, for instance, Joan asked me how I got writing Livier's World, and what it was I was meeting a Russian refugee at synagogue on Saturday mornings, and he had come over here with nothing, got off the plane in Gander, and it was just before the year 2000, and of course he was a computer nut. I mean, he could do anything. And so he was immediately hired by all kinds of companies to tell them what to do with their computers when the date turnover happened.
The whole Y2K thing, yeah.
Yeah, and so, he got me thinking about, well, what if it does happen? And I think that's, what if the plane really does have metal fatigue? What if all these other things happen? What if climate change is even worse than we think it's going to be? And so it allows us to kind of, it's like going to a first aid program. You learn what to do if somebody's broken an arm, but there's no broken arm there. You just have to learn.
Yeah. I do want to say I agree, and at the same time, there is a stereotype out there that science fiction is always dystopian, and I do want to say for any people listening, that's not always the case. Science fiction can be very, it can be very positive thinking as well. It's not always dystopian, but yeah, there's certainly a category of it that is exactly what you're talking about there. Yeah,
It's a lot harder to write a cheerful novel.
I don't know. I'm finding it easier these days, maybe because that's where I want to go.
That's great.
Okay, so tell us, so you're finding it easier. What types of themes are you exploring on that side of a thing, Kate?
Oh, right now I'm working on something set in 1812, which was a difficult time. But I have a young protagonist, and they're very they're excited about life, despite all the difficulties. And there's still magic in the world, There's still exciting things that happen, and humans are resilient. Life is resilient. So, it depends the angle you want to go on. I do love dystopic fiction, too. Don't get me wrong. But right now, for me, I think, especially for a novel, I don't think I want to live in a dystopic place for as long as it takes me to write a novel right now, personally.
Yeah, because I tend to not think that way, right? Because I don't write novels. But when I think of an author who's spending, because you're creating, if it's a dystopic novel, you're creating a world. And you're living in that world for a while. That is the world that you've created. So that's in your headspace all the time, which is just I assume that could be kind of a heavy thing.
But you also get to live with your imaginary friends.
Okay.
That's the hardest part for me ending a novel, is knowing that I have to let go of these people because they didn't actually exist.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for you, Kate, before we let you go?
Oh.
no
That'll be a
pressure
question, and I'll talk forever. But
oh yeah. We just turn
really
down the
glad
mic
you're
at
doing
the
a
end.
show about this.
Yeah.
I think it's a great genre. I don't know. I don't know why there's still so much prejudice against it after all this time. And you don't see that in film or television. People have always found it fairly easy, especially in the last 30 years. There's not still this idea of only nerds watch science fiction. So something like Dune. It's not like only science fiction fans watched Dune.
No.
So the resistance in the literary world continues to mystify me, and I hope people might branch out a little and just try reading some genres that they're not used to reading.
Yeah, it wasn't like Dune was some little art house movie that was
You can
shopped
make
around.
money. That's the difference. You can make money with a science fiction movie. It's very hard to make money with, any book actually. But a lot of it though is. I shouldn't say this. A lot of it is very testosterone driven, the space opera stuff, and it gets compartmentalized because it's thought of as books for a certain kind of person, whereas actually the genre of science fiction contains all of the kind of, there's literary science fiction. I guess nobody's ever really thought about this, but some really, really good writing is in science fiction, and then some really, really bad writing is in science fiction, and you can't blame the whole genre for the subpar writers.
Well, another thing that I asked everybody was about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Which is considered perhaps the first of such novels. And everybody had a really interesting reaction to that, too. So.
All right. Well, Kate, before I let you go, give us your reaction to that, and then that'll be the last thing.
Yes. Well, it's a fantastic book written because of climate change. They were trapped in the house because of Tambora eruption, volcanic eruption, which created all kinds of a miserable 3 years where people were starving to death. So that's one thing that happened. That is why it was written. She was 19 years old. She'd already lost a baby. She had a baby right there in the next room while she was writing it. There's a lot there that I don't know if it's been fully explored. And I think she was poking a bit at Shelley a little bit with the grandiose plans he had for the world. I think she was sort of looking at the dark side of that as well. So she's a really extraordinary piece of work, for sure. And the uneasiness with technology, which I think continues to be a threat in not all science fiction, not the space opera stuff, but quite a lot of it.
Kate Story, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye now.
All right, you're listening to The Signal. We're talking about Newfoundland Quarterly's summer issue, which has got a science fiction theme. I'm Adam Walsh, of course. And, we're kind of mucking our way through a bunch of different themes around science fiction and the writing of it. So here with me in studio, we've got Joan Sullivan, managing editor of NQ, Janet McNaughton, author of young and mature adult novels, and Robin McGraw, multi-genre writer. Any other thoughts on...
You really have to tell people how gorgeous this issue is.
Yes, because we were talking about that before, and I can't believe I had. Thank you. I have not brought that up, Joan. It's gorgeous. Can we get a description of what's in it? Because the art in it, we always talk about the art in the each theme and in the quarterly, but this time a lot of it just from my own kind of personal style, it just kind of really hit a great spot.
Well, the covers by Wallace Ryan, frequent contributor to the Quarterly, and it's a piece of graphic art. It's very much inspired by 1980s heavy metal
Yeah.
kind of stuff, which of course is the best movie ever and with the best soundtrack ever. There's a portfolio by Kara Shepherd, so she's also a musician. She was also shortlisted for, she was also longlisted for the Percy James Fresh Fish Award, so she's multi-talented. So it's very, it's almost like speculative drawing, really, very colorful. We've got a little portfolio from Michael Winter, of course, best known as a novelist and author, but he does these little, I saw on Instagram, he does these little doodles inspired by classic books. So I just said, do you do that about science fiction? You know, like, have you got any examples? So he shared a few of those.
Yeah, they're cool.
And I also just grabbed a bunch of vintage science fiction imagery that's also really colorful. So it's funny because, of course, I don't see the whole issue till I have a proof when we're designing it. So I knew the bits and pieces were coming in, and they were all full of beautiful colors and different shapes and all kinds of imagination. But to put them together, it's the issue itself will publish on Monday, so it still just exists in the PDF form that's been shared with the different contributors and stuff. But everybody seems to have that response. They really like the art in this one for sure.
Sweet. So then, if it's out Monday, it'll hit the mail Tuesday.
As soon as I can get the mail out organized, it'll be done. And as soon as I get out in the retail, it'll be done. But we are here on the Signal Hill campus, and people can come and pick them up from me if they want.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We had an email come in. Let me see. Science fiction entry. This is from Greg Reed, listening from Pistolet Bay area, Kamloops, BC. Which I don't know if you folks know, but the Signal has a very big audience in Kamloops, BC.
Excellent.
I'm kidding. I think Greg's the only one. But anyways,
5 or 6 anyway.
It says, hello, I'm a visitor from away listening in. My entry point was in grade 3. I was in a 3/4 split. Our teacher started reading a book, Mr. Bass or Bass Goes to the Mushroom Planet. I couldn't wait for weeks to hear what happened, and the school library didn't have a copy, so I pestered my mom for a library card, Cornwall, Ontario, and that started it, as they did have a copy. So then I read everything else by that author, and when I asked the librarian for help finding similar books, she pointed out that all the books in the children's section had stickers on the spines, a rocket ship for science fiction. Didn't take me long to get into the weekly maximum 5 books, but was hard on the family supply of flashlight batteries, as many of them were too good to put down after bedtime. That was, as they say, decades ago, and I'm still captivated by the imagination that authors in this genre have to weave the science, and fantasy sometimes too, into a good story of adventure, exploration, speculation, mystery, etc. I particularly fall for those authors in sci-fi who can write decent satire or history or whodunits, etc. in a science fiction cloak. Hooked for life, I am. Greg, thanks for that email. Excellent. What does that say to you when you to have someone that's that long ago kind of just connected with sci-fi and this type of literature?
Well, I think science fiction fans are really, really devoted to the genre, and I guess a lot of genres are like that. I'd never met any romance writers till I joined the Writers Union of Canada, and they're passionately devoted, which I suppose is appropriate, to their genre too. But I mean, people who love science fiction really, really love it in a profound way.
Yeah.
I don't know any casual readers of science fiction, actually.
Yeah. No, I think when you were talking about people finding their place there, that's really hitting something. I think that people.
Well, Kate said that too. Yeah. They don't belong anywhere else, but my God, they belong there.
So, what do you folks consume nowadays for sci-fi? Because we talked about the entry point, right? Oh, this is what I liked way back. But now, are you watching anything, reading anything? Is there science fiction that speaks to you?
I'm a little late to it, but I'm just reading, or I just finished reading The Astronaut's Wife. Is that the one where?
Okay.
Yeah, so which Ted Blades actually was reading on the bus one day and told me how good that was. And I do have a taste for dystopian stuff. And one of my favorite books from here last year was Jay McGraw's We'd Rather Fight Than Eat. Mm-hmm. Which is set in a contemporary Newfoundland with a very original premise of things going wrong. I thought he did a brilliant job. I really recommend that book. Cool. Yeah.
I have to confess, I'm not reading much science fiction these days, But part of it is that I keep switching genres, and I'm doing a lot of nonfiction. And, this time next week it might be different.
Your Labrador? Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Your Labrador reader, which I thought was so good that you did have science fiction in there too.
Yeah.
How do you, when you approach like nonfiction to like science fiction writing, like how different is that process?
Oh, it's really fun.
Yeah.
It really is. Figure out what's going on.
Get to make up stuff.
I like to be a sort of a literary detective.
Yeah.
And find out what's really going on behind the scene with the author. And there's quite a number of books around here that have been written under pseudonyms and no names at all.
Yeah. Cool.
When life is really stressful, I can only reread books. I did that during the pandemic, and I'm doing it now. But I'm rereading not science fiction, but Terry Pratchett's Tiffany Aiken books. I met Terry Pratchett.
Get
He could not
out
open
of
his
town.
mouth without saying something funny. He was amazing. I was on a couple of panels with him at a Worldcon once, and he was wonderful. He was just wonderful. But the Tiffany Aiken books are just terrific. It's this little girl who turns out to be a witch in a place where witches don't happen, and she has these accompanying creatures, which if you called them fairies, they'd beat the living daylights out of you, the Macnac Feagles. And but it's about the fact that the witches are the people who do all the grunt work. They look after old people. They cure diseases in pigs. Where the wizards are up there in the academic sphere doing what they think is magic, but all the real important stuff is being done by the witches. And it was a safe place for me to go at a very stressful moment.
Yeah.
And I'm just enjoying it so much. I'm just chain rereading. There's like 5 books, and I'm just chain reading them. I finish one, I pick up the next one immediately.
I'm kicking myself for not rereading Terry Pratchett during that period
Pandemic.
because I read like the Discworld series and it was just so enjoyable.
Well, the Tiffany Aiken books are part of the Discworld
Yeah.
series, but they're kind of standalone. He was brilliant. He was just amazing at what he could do. And the whole thing about the witches is the witches do things that nobody else will do. The stuff, the ugly, messy, awful stuff that nobody else will do. And that really resonates in my life right now. So, it's amazing to me, actually, that a man could do this, could realize that, the stuff that nobody else wants to do that's really ugly and messy and smelly and awful is actually the important stuff.
Yeah. Well, every blue moon you get someone like a guy like Terry Pratchett who realizes it, right?
Yes.
Because most of us don't.
Well, most people don't, but yes.
Joan, you're going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say I also just watched the most recent new Planet of the Apes movie. So talking about, I don't know if it's satire, but, definitely sussing out political and social structures. And I haven't, but will definitely go see Furiosa. So that whole Mad Max series, right from the beginning, has been really, really good.
Yeah.
And I guess must be 40 years since George Miller made the first original one. That's quite fascinating too.
Oh, the last one I saw in theater, and the whole time it was just on the dial to 10, it was like an 11 the whole time for like intensity, and when it was done, I was just like, I feel like I just ran some kind of like marathon sprint. Just my heart was still going. It was such a good movie.
His whole envisioned world, I love it in the early movies. There's a scene where they're all in a compound and they're figuring out how to fix something. But anyway, they yell from person to person to get the word from one person to another, and it's been so consistent. What's happened and what is happening in those films in that world.
I almost don't want to talk about the fall, but I do have to ask you because I got to ask you what the next theme is.
It's broadly sail.
Yep.
So we'll be talking about transatlantic trade. I'm hoping to get Newfoundland connections to exploring in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And there's a piece, I'll tease this a little bit. Have you ever heard of a sailor's Valentine? Sailor's Valentines?
No.
No, I hadn't either. They're objects that a lot of sailors on that triangular trade going from Portugal and then down to Jamaica and then back here would bring to their sweethearts. And I'll just stop there, but it's an interesting feature on that. So we'll see. And I'd like to do something on boat building and am I going to pronounce this right? The Lubov Orlova.
Orlova.
I think I would like to do a
That's cool.
piece on that. The timeline of that ship's journey was just so fascinating. Even who she was named after.
I interviewed the owner before it went out, and the whole story about the rat infestation and getting lost at sea. But when the Lubov Orlova was tied alongside, I got a little tour of it, and it was cool. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Maybe you should be part of the timeline.
Right.
So is it, I believe she is believed to be wrecked off Ireland?
Something like that,
Is that
yeah.
true?
Yeah, I'd have to go
Really?
double check it.
I believe so.
Quite the story around that ship.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I'd like to do something on that. I think that's such that there's so many levels to that story.
Amazing. Thanks for this sci-fi chat.
Oh, are we finished?
Thank you.
My
We
goodness,
are,
that
we're
went
done. Thank you.
fast.
Yeah, I'm gonna
It was
promo.
fun.
Yeah, it was like, look, a Friday, summertime Friday show talking about sci-fi, just the way I want to spend my lunch hour.
And it's actual summer.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So there we go. Thank you all. So Joan Sullivan, Janet McNaughton, and Robin McGraw. Thank you. Looking ahead to Monday, folks. Let me see. Where are we with Monday's show? Oh, that's right. I'm thinking of The Debaters, enjoying the 18th season on CBC Radio 1. Hit show. Comics go toe-to-toe in a battle of laughs and logic. I've got 4 comics booked for the show on Monday for here in studio ahead of the live taping Monday night. One of them is including Steve Patterson, the host. So it's going to be a fantastic show on a Monday. Don't miss it. We're going to have a laugh and a half. And we're going to talk about the business of being funny and also just how to make comedy. So that is for Monday. It's Friday. I tend to try to leave with a Friday type tune. John Blake, what do we have today? Do you want to just roll it? Just give me a flavor of what we have for Friday. There it is. Okay, everyone. Here's some good vibrations for you. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. Bye.